What is woke? The weird thing about that question is it depends entirely on who you ask, because it's almost a symbol of how our society has become divided to the point that even the definition of words are divided along political lines. And even stranger, woke now lives in the purgatory of a collection of different words where, depending on who you ask, you won't get any answer at all. Because woke has become not so much a word representing a single definition as an idea by which many people define their entire identities in relation to. But before we talk about that particular usage, let's look back to the origins of the term. Woke originated as part of African American vernacular, specifically talking about becoming aware or awake to the ideas of systematic racial injustice. This isn't a new term. It's been around in the African American community for decades, going all the way back to the 1930s. But it only made the jump to white Americans and to the wider global context with the Black Lives Matter protests in around 2014, and it spread largely by Twitter. By that point, it had been being used in Black Twitter quite widely in the Stay Woke version of its usage, talking about the systematic oppression and discrimination against Black people in America by all kinds of areas of American state and society. Weirdly enough, this is very similar to the scope of critical race theory, whose development from a term describing an academic field into a bogeyman for the right almost mirrors perfectly the development of how woke is used in our discourse. But of course, as often happens when white people get their hands on terminology from ethnic minority groups, when it did make the jump over to white Twitter users, they made it about themselves. And white leftist and progressive groups broadened the use of the word woke to be aware of other forms of systematic injustice, whether that was sexism, disability rights, LGBT rights, poverty, all the ways in which American state and society has embedded in it various forms of prejudice and discrimination. And of course, the moment that white progressives got their hands on it, so did white reactionaries, and it shortly after became used as a pejorative term by those groups, using the term sarcastically or ironically in reference to those same progressives and their seen as holier than thou mindset. So, a term that had been used for decades in the African American community as a call to raise awareness ended up being used as a weapon for white people to fight each other online. The evolution of the term doesn't end there though, because otherwise we wouldn't have ended up in a position where some angry Star Wars fans started accusing a new trailer for a TV show of being woke because it doesn't follow what they saw as being the Star Wars canon. What happened after it began its leap over to terminally online reactionaries is that those particularly irony poisoned people started using it very widely as an accusation against anyone they saw as a progressive. And so it became slang to them, an insult for their use against anything and anyone that they saw as progressive. And as those people started using it in the context of wider reactionary communities, moving on to YouTube and Facebook, communities that are overall very isolated from the progressives who'd taken it in the first place, and especially from the African American communities from which the term originated, those groups only learned to see the word as a term for progressivism, completely alienated from its original usage. It no longer had any connection to the concept of systematic inequalities. I wouldn't be surprised if many of those people didn't even make the connection of this woke with the concept of being awake. And the supreme irony of their use of it as an insult when so many leading conspiracy theorists of the right have turned to the metaphors of waking up or taking the red pill to become aware of what is actually happening in society around you and how it's structured against you. Those conspiracy theories and the terminology used around them have exactly the same structure as the origins of the term woke. A connection completely lost through its transition from part of African American vernacular through to an insult wielded by the right. And from this divorce from its original meaning, all the way through to its general purpose use as an insult, it has transitioned from having a very specific meaning to a meaning that changes depending on who you ask. Because by transitioning from quite a specific meaning over to a general purpose insult for anything progressive, it therefore becomes defined by anyone who identifies themselves as the opposite of anything progressive. And to those people, the concept of what is progressive is the distorting, poisoning, changing of things that they hold dear, things they do not wish to change. That's how you get people accusing a Star Wars trailer of being woke, despite it having absolutely no elements that could possibly be tied back to its original usage. Because the way they see it is, if that trailer has elements in it which they see as a changing of what they hold dear, which is Star Wars canon, then that is wokeness. It is change they dislike. And that is the modern definition of woke in the right. And because every single person has different things that they hold dear, it means that if you ask any single person to define woke after they make that kind of accusation, they won't be able to come up with a specific definition. Because although they can identify woke in specific examples, you could give them a list of things and they'd be able to tell you what they consider to be woke. They will struggle to give you an objective definition because the only thing that they've identified through those examples is things that are personal to them. And as so many of them pride themselves on being objective, intellectual people who are divorced from emotional attachments to things, who are above such petty things as being entirely personally driven by nostalgia, because that is all it comes down to. Their nostalgia, their rose-tinted glasses of the past that they have become emotionally attached to, even though it doesn't actually exist outside of their imaginations. They will fling accusations that certain things are woke because those things feel like an attack on their nostalgia. And sometimes in the very same sentence will throw the accusation that facts are more important than your feelings. As if their entire worldview, everything they are railing against, isn't entirely driven by their emotions. This makes it an incredibly powerful political tool, because if there's anything that the right relies on in every single one of its political campaigns, it's a call on people's nostalgia and accusing everyone else of being a threat to what they hold dear because they threaten to change things. And so right-wing campaigners can weaponize this concept of woke, this assault on their supporters' nostalgia, in defense of all the systems that exist to maintain their power, that maintain systematic economic inequality, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, that strip away support for those who are struggling in order to empower those who have held the power the entire time. And yes, that includes white supremacy. And so the story turns full circle, as the concept of woke is used to empower the exact same systematic inequalities that created the call to stay woke in the first place, decades ago.